Alrighty, next up we're doing geocoding. So geocoding is basically this really common thing that you see on maps, really common use, where people can enter in their address or a place or a city or a state or country or whatever, and they'll be presented with a list, or there'll be some kind of information that they can pick from, and then the map will move to that place. We've talked a little bit about geocoding in different ways, turning addresses into points. This is the same idea. It's turning some text, either an address or a country or something, into either a point in the case of an address or a bounding box in the case of like a country. Because when you're zooming to a country, you're not zooming to a specific point, you're zooming to the overall shape. Same with a city and some other things like that, a river, an ocean. These might not necessarily be points, they might be a bounding box. So geocoding is going to give you a way to let your users search for stuff. So in this case, we're actually not going to look at MapLibra. We're going to look at Mapbox, which is, again, they're basically very, very similar. But the reason I'm using that is because Mapbox has a geocoder plugin, but it is tied up with their API keys, because geocoding is generally a service that you have to pay for. Generally, and with the leaflet, we're going to look at something that you can get around that. But usually you're going to have to pay for really good quality geocoding. And Mapbox has some really easy stuff to make this work. If we just go geocoder Mapbox, we're going to see they're add a geocoder. And all it is they have a special plugin that you just add some JavaScript and CSS here, add a control, and it appears up in the top right. So adding the control, we've looked at in a couple other videos, but it's just a little bit of code like this. You give it an access token and some other stuff it says, and it'll pop up in the top. So I just done exactly the same thing. So now I can search, Vancouver, and it'll present me this nice little list. I can click on one, and it'll do this whole flying thing where it adds a marker and it goes to Vancouver. And there's lots of documentation on this that if you wanted to modify this to do some slightly different stuff, you could. It's got all these options and everything like that. Let's see, its parameters. You can make it so it's not going to show a marker. You can make it so it's in a different language, or that it only shows results from some countries. That's all going to be in the options here. So the Mapbox one is a really good thing you can use. It also does work on MapLibra. Like, you could just add this code or the code from the example and make it work on MapLibra. You'd still have to add the access token, and I think there's something in the terms of service that says you're not allowed to use this unless it's on a Mapbox map. So just bear that in mind. It will work, but you're not really supposed to do it. So, okay, the Mapbox one's super straightforward because they deliberately made it really easy. Leaflet, it's going to be a bit more. You can see this code is a bit crazier. Okay, now all of this I basically found by searching around to see what's out there. And this leads us into some cool stuff when it comes to Leaflet, which is that there's a lot of people that have built out plugins and additional functionality over the years. And it's because it's a big open source thing. So here in the Leaflet plugins database, one of the things we're going to find is geocoding. We're going to find lots of stuff here. And there's animation stuff, there's full screen stuff. Anytime that there's something that you want to do that doesn't seem to be built into the core of Leaflet, it's worth coming to this little plugins database first and looking through it a little. Now, when it comes to geocoding, there's a lot of them. Look at all of them that are available. There's tons and tons. Some are older than others. You can see here 3 months ago, 9 years ago, 6 years ago, 5, some of them just have errors. So that's the thing about the open source. Sometimes they get dropped. It's hard to rely on over long term, but some of these look like they're pretty well going. So let's see which one I chose to use. I chose to use one here that is from this thing, Tomic Gazor autocomplete. Oh, that's the actual autocomplete thing. I think we have some of this right here, Leaflet autocomplete, right there. That's Gregor Tomiki. Sorry, Gregor, I butchered your name. And if we go to the demo, we can see it is the same exact demo that I have. So look, I just lifted it directly. And there's a link to the GitHub. So we can go to the GitHub and see more about how this works. So we're going to quickly go through the code, although honestly, just copy pasting it is probably fine. Let's see how it works here. I type in Vancouver, and it pops down some stuff, and then it just flips the map instantly. It doesn't do that little zoom over because that's not how Leaflet works. Drops a marker, but fundamentally it's the same idea. And you could move this around, put it inside a little legend so that it appears in the top right of the map, or put somewhere outside the map, whatever you want to do. You can move this around. So let's look briefly at the code. Okay, so all I did was take what he had and dropped it into my example. So we can see here he's loading Leaflet, then he loads the CSS and JavaScript of the particular plugin. Then there's a bunch of custom CSS, and this is not too important. This is just to kind of make this little layout and make this stuff look nice and center it and everything. So not too important. We just kind of keep going through the code here. Okay, so we see here is the HTML for all this stuff. We can see here the ID of the input box is called search. That's probably going to be important. Then we set up the map, basic map setup, and then there's this whole thing, the autocomplete. So this is, again, just copied from his stuff. And there's some options here, which would all be documented in this. There would be some options with what you can, okay, do we select it? The first one, if I press enter, how many characters until they search? Do they type 5? Do they type 3? Do they type 2? All that sort of stuff. Then on the search, you can use a different backend to power your geocoding. The open source one is Nominatum. We looked at that briefly in the API section of this part of the course. Nominatum, you can do a search and give it some information, and it will send back, like a bounding box or a point if it can find it. So in here, on search, which is basically happens after the type, he hits Nominatum and gets back a bunch of information. Then there's some stuff here that formats how it shows the results. Again, we don't have to look too much into this. It's going to blow your brain up if you try. And then on submit, this is a valuable part, which basically sends the user to the part of the map that for the thing they selected, for the place they selected. You can see here, it adds a marker and it sets the view to a lat long. Okay, that's cool. That's basically how it works. And you can just kind of copy paste it in. You don't have to understand every little chunk of it. But that's going to get you doing geocoding on your various types of maps. Definitely more complicated when it comes to Leaflet because it's not something that's just built in. But using these plugins, you can get a functionality that's really quite good and still works like Mapbox to some degree. Or you can just use Mapbox and just drop that in, no problem, really quick to use. Anyway, that's pretty much it for geocoding. There's obviously a lot more that can be done with this topic, but I think that's enough for you to get started. So we'll see you in the next one.